Är klickaren klar?
Yes.
Men avslöja inget i förväg nu.
Inga spoilers.
Precis. Och streamen ute nu.
Nu är streamen ut. Nu kan du säga någonting.
Nu säger jag någonting. Våran prost är rund som en ost.
Ja.
Välkomna alla. Eller welcome everyone. Har vi några som tittar live?
Vi är 6 stycken här.
2 stycken IRL.
You here for the show?
No, have to go.
Det är så snyggt i bild.
Jag ska vara med.
Ja, bra. Där får man inte sitta.
Får man inte sitta här?
Nej, då är
på
jag-
andra sidan.
Precis.
Då går jag till andra sidan.
Ni behöver inte ha på streamen allihopa, så jag kör på wifi.
Ja.
Så det inte börjar lagga.
Tror du att det kommer någon, eller kommer alla vara med på streamen?
Alla kommer vara på streamen.
Så du har köpt godis till oss? Fan vilken lyx.
Vi är ju med.
David
alltså,
och Josefin ASMR.
Ja, vad kul! Och det är ju en ny grej.
Och Pelle K.
Mm. Nu kommer det IRL-publik.
Ja,
nice.
nämen, vad roligt.
Georg, hur har du det i Spanien?
Hej. Snurra ner.
Välkommen!
Tja!
Hej, Malte.
Milla, jag kommer från Studiefrämjandet.
Va?
Hej!
Det är vi som har mejlat, tror jag.
Jaha, är det du som är Andreas?
Ja, precis.
Tja,
Andreas,
hej!
trevligt.
Precis, jag skulle kommit med Tommy egentligen, men han kunde inte.
Ja,
så
okej. Ja.
jag kommer istället.
Ja, men nice.
Du kommer sätta dig på
Du är
den här
välkommen.
sidan.
Ja,
Så att,
fan vad grymt. Ja men vad kul, vad bra att träffa dig.
Ja, vi kan...
Jag tänkte såhär, shit, när man inte vet hur någon ser ut. Så.
Nej,
Så. Sen finns det godis och läskeblask.
Och frukt.
Och frukt. Livets godis.
Livets godis.
ska jag dra på lite kaffe?
Var brukar jag sitta någonstans?
Inte för min del.
Precis vad du vill. På den här sidan. På den här sidan.
Är det någon som vill ha kaffe? Ska jag dra på lite?
Det är bra för mig också.
Vi ser det.
Går min röst ut på streamen? Hello everyone, we'll start in about a minute. Or 2 maybe.
Vill du ha någonting?
Jag tror precis att det funkar. Så att jag-
Ja, det är bara att säga till om du vill att jag ska skicka dig någonting.
Vill du ha glas också? Ja, de flesta sitter inte här.
Nu har vi Moa Murders och Yumi
Oh, welcome.
i chatten.
Jag gör så att jag sätter mig hos mig och så får ni hojta om den. Det går bra, va?
Väntar du?
Man får sitta på den sidan.
Alltid.
Mm.
Eller ja, du får ju sitta där borta om du hellre vill.
Lyder Maltes direktiv.
Okay, let's start this presentation then. Everyone ready? For those of you watching the stream, questions in the chat. Jessica will forward them to me, and we welcome all kinds of questions, even the ones that interrupt. So keep an eye on the chat, Jessica. We'll start this presentation in this end. Some of you know very well what this is about. This is a copyright strike. This is a picture I just picked from somewhere else. This starts a process that looks like this to the average YouTuber. From the innocent YouTuber's point of view, this looks like this. Someone makes a claim that they own copyrights on your channel. And YouTube, in this situation, removes the video without even discussing or thinking about it. You complain to YouTube and no one really listens to you. You use the dispute function built into your channel and available when such a thing happens. And there are weeks before you even get a reply. It's denied. You appeal it. There's another long time of waiting. Long time goes by, and suddenly the video is back again. This usually raises a couple of very valid questions. Five seconds pause, please. Just silencing some colleagues here. This leads to some questions. Who came up with this system? What were they really thinking about? And why doesn't YouTube listen to my very good arguments? We've had partners, even in this situation, showing license agreements to YouTube and nothing happens. There actually are very clear answers to these questions. Anyone in the IRL audience like to answer question 1, for example? Who set up the system? US Congress. With a unanimous vote, which is really not very common nowadays, and the European Council. It's actually 2 separate laws, but they look very much like each other, so for this function they are very parallel. They needed to set up a process that works as well with old-fashioned paper mail as well as online services, which is why there's these very long delays of 1 month to make sure that things don't get messed up simply because mail doesn't reach its address. And YouTube is not allowed to interfere. This is a process set up by law. Not even if YouTube thinks your arguments are excellent, they are not allowed to interfere once a copyright strike has been issued. This law is, the US law is called OCELA, that means Online Copyright Infliction Limitation something. It's part of a very wide law called the DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and the Electronic Commerce Directive, which is the EU parallel. And I put up this picture of boats here, because what these laws are is something called a safe harbor law. Safe harbor is a more general legal concept That means that if you fulfill certain regulations, you are never liable. For example, let's say there's a law against reckless driving with your car. Then we can set up a safe harbor regulation that says that as long as you're driving below 20 kilometers per hour, you're never liable. That would be a safe harbor law. Welcome, another IRL audience. No problem. These two laws have clear safe harbor regulations that look like this. Safe harbor in Mozilla and ECD. If you run a platform that is open for user uploads for anyone and may have copyright protected material uploaded, this is not the safe harbor now, but this is the standard law, so to say, you will be liable for those copyright violations. However, here's the safe harbor clause. If you add a process to quickly remove material, here's your copyright strike web form. When you fill in the copyright strike web form and submit it, YouTube brings the video down within an hour or so. This is to comply with this rule. And for the uploader to dispute it, that's the dispute form and the month of waiting. And for the claimant to move the conflict to a court, that's the end of the process. Once you reach the end of the process, the claimant gets the choice: do you want to leave this and have the video reinstated, or do you want to take it to court? That's when it leaves the YouTube system and goes into the legal system entirely. But if you have these 3 points, I've made them into sort of normal language. It's actually much more complicated. But if you have these 3 points, you are in safe harbor, you being the platform. So if someone uploads copyright material and you have this in place, the user is the one liable. And that's how YouTube works today, right? And that's also how Facebook works, and Twitter, and all these big platforms. I had to give you, this is now 10-year-old laws. And I had to give you this background because otherwise the whole Article 13 discussion is sort of impossible to understand. Because this is sort of the key to it all. This is how it looks today. Now, we're going to do something maybe a little surprising. We're actually going to read Article 13 line by line. It's surprisingly understandable. It's, and also, if you go online, there's versions in every EU language. So let's start here with the headline. It says, use of protected content by information society service providers. That's Google and Facebook. Information society service providers. Storing and giving access to large amounts of works. That's sort of to limit it to the big ones. This is not for someone who sets up something for their friends. This is for the ones storing large amounts of works. So this is essentially saying Google, Facebook, SoundCloud, Dailymotion, Twitter, etc. And other subject matter uploaded by their users. This is the key here. This is only about big platforms storing large amounts of works uploaded by their users. Information society service providers, remember that's Google or YouTube, that store and provide to the public access to a large amount of works. So we're still just defining this is about Google, Facebook and their friends. Shall. Here's the first shall for them. In cooperation with rights holders, take measures to ensure the functioning of agreements concluded with rights holders. Meaning, if Google makes a deal with the rights holder, let's say, for example, Stim, Tono, or Teosto, which would be 3 agreements that are actually in place, they must take measures to ensure that these agreements actually work in their systems. Or to prevent the availability on their services or works or other subject matters identified by rights holders through the cooperation with the service providers. Meaning that if you've made a deal with, for example, Stim, Tono, or Teosto, that some things should not be available, you must put that in your system as well. Here are some really important things. Those measures, such as the use of effective content recognition technologies. This is a new one, because you remember in the old system, the simple safe harbor, the only really thing that was actually needed was a web form where people could submit complaints. Now, the lawmaker asks for content recognition technologies. So this is sort of content ID. 10 seconds pause. Just quieting my colleagues here. Shall be appropriate and proportionate. This should be read as in proportion to your size. So you can demand a lot from Google, but you can not demand very much from a startup. You can demand a lot of someone who's been running a successful operation for 5 years, not from someone who started last week. The service providers shall provide rights holders with adequate information on the functioning and the deployment of the measures. Meaning that you don't just have to install this thing, you actually have to help people use it. As well as, when relevant, adequate reporting on the recognition and use of works and other subject matter. This is actually very simple. If you put up something like this, like a content ID system, people have to actually get access to the results. If I own a movie, use this technique, I should be able to get a list of hits. Isn't it surprisingly understandable? Next rules. Member states shall ensure that the service providers referred to in paragraph 1, Google and their friends, put in place complaints and redress mechanisms. So that's essentially the same thing as before, only now that we want it in the technological system. That are available to users in case of disputes over the application of measures referred to in paragraph 1. Very simple. You have to put it in the system, you have to make it available. This is just to sort of shut down all sorts of holes, so a platform can't just put the technology there and then not give access to anyone. Member states shall facilitate where appropriate. That's wording that really puts it in the member states to make the decision themselves. The cooperation between the information society service providers and rights holders through stakeholder dialogues to define best practices. This is just really opening and saying that you rights holders and you service providers, you have to do the talks yourself and define on how to handle these things. For example, what does it mean with appropriate and proportionate content recognition? What is enough? Well, we leave that to you, parties on the market. Taking into account, among others, the nature of the services, the availabilities of technologies and their effectiveness in light of technological developments. Meaning, you rights holders can't put up a fantasy about a system that doesn't exist, but on the other hand, you service providers don't come with a 20-year-old technology when there is better available. And that's the whole Article 13. So now let's try to find out why everyone is so worked up about it. First thing, there's quite a lot of straw men wandering around here. Straw men meaning when you want to argue about something, you argue about something that's really never been a reality. I'll take a real straw man argument here. Eric, do you like dogs?
Yes.
Eric doesn't like cats. He never said so. It's a scandal. That's a classic straw man argument. He never said anything about cats, but I'm arguing about cats. First one, the law doesn't apply to the internet. The law is about very large service providers, such as Google, Facebook, and SoundCloud. I keep bringing up SoundCloud because I'm still at the position that the only one I know that might have a problem with this new law is SoundCloud. The law does not demand filtering. The law demands that you set up a system that may allow filtering if the rights holders want that. There's nothing about memes in here that is not already in the law. The only thing there is a demand for a technological system to identify instead of just searching. But if you want to make a meme out of my picture, I can already today bring it down if I don't like it. No one cares about your blog. No one will scan it, not under this law anyway. Are we not getting any questions?
No.
Hey, stream viewers, shape up. We want questions. So, I can now see that my animation here doesn't work, so I'll bring it all up at the same time. Like any laws, we have to make some kind of interpretation. And I put up a very simple graphic here that this law solves all problems that we have, to the other extreme, that this law means that Armageddon is coming, everything has to be shut down, and we're standing before a great catastrophe. Our interpretation, I'll come back to the points later, is that this is a fairly good law. It doesn't solve all the problems, we're not here, but it actually demands that we set up tools for solving problems. There's still a big need for people to work with these issues, to get some sort of expertise on these issues, and not until we're there, we've actually begun solving problems. We've spoken to Facebook. They see a little more problems than we do. Facebook, of course, is full of pictures, and technology isn't really good today at identifying pictures, like video and audio. Might become a problem, might create some headaches, but on the whole, they're somewhere in the middle. They think that it's probably okay. They're not sleepless about this. But then we have Google on the extreme there, seeing this law as a giant threat. So trying to understand that, we'll skip to the next picture. This is how we interpret it. In general, we think it's reasonable, and we think the platforms we're talking about, they definitely can afford and should have the respect for rights holders to put these technologies in place. Instead of the web forms are essentially hopeless when it comes to the volumes that are created on YouTube. There are some interpretation issues. This law is definitely about YouTube, Facebook, etc. But how big do you really have to be? Dailymotion, is that big enough? Some other web upload thing, is it big enough? There's a lot of interpreting still to do. And now here's Google's position, which really is what brought this on the table as before. Remember now the safe harbor story I told you in the beginning. Google's position is that since the law does not specifically say that safe harbor isn't affected by this, the law says nothing about safe harbor. We read it. There was nothing about safe harbor there. Since it doesn't say that safe harbor rules will still apply, Google says that because of this, there will be someone somewhere that will want to make the interpretation that they do not apply. When we reason with Google, they say, yes, your interpretation is the natural one, but we will eventually meet some extreme person who will want to make the interpretation that safe harbor doesn't apply anymore.
Yes.
We have a question from the audience.
Questions and comments. Pelle, didn't YouTube go out in a statement saying they have to make YouTube unavailable to everyone in the EU if we pass this law? Or is it just smoke and mirrors? Well,
they said that they may have to do something like that. And that's a key thing. I couldn't say I know what Google top management want to decide. What I think they're trying to do is to force this change. And if we want to be honest, if I were a politician in this system here, I'd say what they're asking for, it's a little ridiculous, but it's also very cheap to give it to them. I mean, nobody's dying because we specifically say that safe harbor still applies, because safe harbor should still apply. What they're saying to sort of strengthen this is that YouTube is such a juicy target if you, for example, own music rights and want to target YouTube. So they say even if you're right, Malte, that this is a very extreme interpretation, someone will want to make that interpretation. Because of that, it's a risk for YouTube. This is what Google would say if you reached them for a discussion. Another question? Comment?
What about composition rights? How is it possible to have a tool to manage this? What I understand, they are forced to now from GEOI.
I'll repeat the question. What about composition rights? Well, composition, if we limit ourselves to YouTube, composition rights are already identified. It's identified in two ways. There is a melody match algorithm, and there's also a tie between registered sound and the composition. So the system knows if you upload that song that it's this composition that should be tied to it. So yes, this is definitely about compositions as well. Further questions?
No.
Don't read this. I just wanted to point out this is from the start of the whole directive.
Before you start with it, we have comments.
Okay.
Pelle, gotcha, thanks. My internet is a bit like blah blah blah. More questions though. Does Article 13 possibly make YouTube then block or remove creators from the EU?
No, Article 13 does nothing of the sort. The problem at hand is that if Google decides that Article 13 may create a large risk for YouTube, YouTube may decide to, I don't think it'll ever go there, But if something is blocked, it's because YouTube made that decision, because they thought it was a risk. Article 13 as such, or the legal authorities as such, will never block anything. I just wanted to point out before the next question, I put this up here to sort of show how very, very outlying YouTube's interpretation of this is, or Google's. This is the start of the entire directive. And here's, it says that this proposal is consistent with existing EU copyright legal framework. And then it lists all the legal framework. And this one is where the safe harbor is. So it doesn't say specifically in Article 13 that we're not touching safe harbor, but it says here that we are consistent with all these laws, and here's the safe harbor. So they are really identifying the worst case scenario that is so very outlying that I can't even really construct it. But if you ask Google, they'll say that, well, someone will try. And I only have one more slide, so may I take that before we have any more questions? I love questions, but just to not leave this hanging. The timeline. If everything goes according to EU plans, there's a final Parliament vote end of 2018 or maybe beginning of 2019. After that, there's a European Council vote. In this case, sort of a formality if it's passed the Parliament, but that's where the actual decision is made. And then there's 2 years during which it should be implemented in national laws, and usually everyone is quite late. So you could implement a national law here, but everyone will do it, I'd say here, beginning of 2021. And that concludes the presentation. And I'm looking forward to questions and comments. And all of you people listening, you're very welcome also to give your answers to questions if they come.
And it's Battlefront updates. If someone makes that worst interpretation you brought up and goes after YouTube, who would decide who's in the right or wrong?
Well, that would be for a court to decide. And since this is only about European viewing, please note it's not about European uploaders, it's about European viewing. That would be in a court somewhere in Europe, wherever the claimant decides to file it. And that's also, I think, one source of irritation. Now it's me speculating here. No one has actually told me, but I think it's a sort of piece of irritation for Google that they have to take local European laws so much into account here. Usually all of YouTube operates under California law. Further questions? One from the IRL audience.
Yeah. So it's perfectly clear what the law does, kind of. It forces the companies to track and manage rights, copyright.
Yes, or
Pretty much,
to provide tools for it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, and provide the tools for doing it. I get that, but interpreting how much of something you can use when it becomes an interpretation, for example, fair use. Wouldn't Google having these things in place and being scared of going to court just blanket ban every use, including what today is considered fair use? Isn't that a risk?
I'll repeat the question because the audience here doesn't have a mic. Okay. The question, I think, summarizes that isn't there a risk that Google will blanket ban anything that is in the gray area between, where there's a question if it's fair use or not just blanket ban anything? No, I'd say there's no risk of that, because because this system sort of demands of Google to handle this very formally, and as long as they stick to the protocol, it's always a problem between the uploader and the one who owns the rights. So it doesn't become Google's problem until someone has said that Google is handling this wrong.
Well, if I have a follow-up question.
Hmm?
Well, yeah, but so far it's been managed by a rights holder claiming the rights mostly, right?
Hmm?
Yeah. And when they do that, they do it in context. I mean, they see the context in which their copyrighted material is used. But if you force Google to have a far-reaching automatic system, that system won't understand the context. It doesn't distinguish between a clip in a documentary and the full material of whatever was used in that documentary.
Yeah. Question is summed up as handling this with very automatic processes and demanding that, for example, YouTube have these automatic processes. Will that not create a risk that things are automatically claimed by people or machines not understanding the context, and it's always the context that determines whether something is fair use?
Exactly.
Totally get you, and my sad answer would be that yes, there is definitely such a risk, and we have that risk already today. It's happening every day, that people just upload their copyrighted material to Content ID, auto-block everything, and no one is even considering whether it's fair use or not. So you're right about the risk, but sadly we have it today already. And we're dealing with it, well, not maybe on a daily basis, but quite often. And we also, I mean, we handle a lot of rights. We also have to take that into consideration when we monitor everything, all the videos we claim, and we have to take that into consideration. Is it fair use? And honestly, sometimes it is. Sometimes people are not just copying, but as you said, for example, making a documentary. And it's, I really think that there should be some kind of punishment for people just auto-blocking without considering fair use, but not for me to decide, maybe. Further questions?
Worst case scenario question from Pelle. Wouldn't the YouTube EU ban make it illegal to be a creator from within those banned countries, even if we are creators? If so, should we move our channel region info or no need?
I would say, firstly, let's not indulge too much in Google's nightmares. I honestly think there is almost no risk that anything will happen. But if you want to be super safe, sorry, since this is not about European creators or European uploads or something, it's about European viewing. So even if you move your channel to Malaysia or something, as long as you have European viewers, this will still be a question for you. Another IRL question.
Det var svaret från Pelle.
Ah, okay.
But I can ask you a question. So, for me as a creator, as a Swedish creator with Swedish audience, du kan upprepa min fråga annars. How will this affect me if I don't use music and I just do vlogs?
Question was how will this affect me, a Swedish YouTuber, not using music, not using anybody else's material, just vlogging? It shouldn't affect you at all, more than as a rights holder if someone starts copying your material. Another IRL question.
Yeah.
Great. I'll move close, you can speak to the microphone.
Well, hello. Well, if you have art, say behind you when you're filming something, is that fair use, or how far do you go for this?
That's actually that is an interesting question.
Yeah.
It's not fair use.
No.
It can be allowed. There's a long grey area between something just flashing by and something being, for example, a part of your set. If it's a part of your set, you're definitely using copyright or that artist's rights. If you're passing by in a corridor and some art flashes by and you're not zooming in on it and making a thing on it.
How far? Like, say it's a mirror, for example, from IKEA. Can I still use it in my background?
Yeah, I would say yes. I've never heard any complaints about such things.
No, but yeah, I'm just asking.
Further questions?
Nothing from the YouTube live stream.
Then I think we can conclude today's Article 13 party. And if there's any questions that you come up with afterwards, feel free to send them to your partner manager, who will discuss it with whoever they like. Thank you, everyone.
Vi är fortfarande live. Får man säga vad man vill?
Ska jag få en copyright-låt?
Ja.